Have you ever wondered where those iconic Cabbage Patch dolls came from? Maybe you were lucky enough to own one back in the 80s, or maybe you were unlucky enough to find yourself injured from a Cabbage Patch riot. Today we are going to talk about the untold true story of the origins of the Cabbage Patch doll and the craze that took over the world. Buckle up for a story of betrayal, marketing genius, and the worst of capitalism. Let's rewind the clock to the late 70s. Picture yourself at a quaint craft fair, surrounded by the soft hum of conversation, the scent of fresh coffee, and a variety of homemade goods. Amidst the typical homemade pottery and knitted scarves, you come across something truly unique. There's a small display of dolls, but these aren't your typical mass-produced toys. These dolls are soft, almost lifelike, with expressive faces and squishy bodies. They don't just look like toys. They look like little beings with their own personality. These are the doll babies, and they were the brainchild of Martha Nelson Thomas, an artist with a vision unlike anything the toy world had ever seen. These dolls were unlike anything that existed on the market at the time. In an era dominated by stiff plastic figures, Martha's creations were soft-bodied, warm, and welcoming, almost like real babies. Each one was handcrafted with love, giving it a distinct personality and its own identity. They weren't just generic store-bought items. No, these were one-of-a-kind dolls that could be adopted, each coming with an adoption certificate. It wasn't just a doll. It was a companion, a member of the family. Imagine a child receiving a doll that came with a certificate declaring it their new adopted family member, complete with its own name, a backstory, and even a little personality. This was some next-level personalization that no other doll at the time could compete with. Martha's idea wasn't just about creating dolls. She was creating experiences. These dolls weren't meant to just be playthings. They were meant to evoke emotion, to spark a sense of ownership and care in each child who adopted them. Each doll baby was crafted with its own quirk, expressions, and even clothes, making them seem more real and relatable than anything mass-produced. Every detail, from the hand-stitched hair to the carefully chosen clothes, was designed to make the doll feel like a living, breathing little person. Now here's where the story takes a twist. While Martha's dolls were already something special, what happened next would forever change the course of their legacy. Enter Xavier Roberts. Xavier Roberts was an artist with a background in ceramics. Roberts had been working in the world of art, creating his own pieces, when he stumbled across Martha Nelson Thomas's doll babies at a local craft fair in the late 70s. To say he was intrigued would be an understatement. According to accounts, Roberts purchased several of these dolls from Martha, and it didn't take long for him to recognize the potential of what he had just encountered. He saw an opportunity, not just to make some money, but to create something that could be mass-marketed, sold, and adored by the public. In his eyes, these dolls had the makings of a global sensation. So, Roberts did what any savvy entrepreneur would do. He took the idea and ran with it. But he didn't simply copy Martha's dolls. He made some key changes that would eventually lead to the creation of the Cabbage Patch Kids. First, he slapped his own signature on the dolls, branding them as his own. This was a critical part of his strategy. By signing his name on the dolls, Roberts was taking ownership of the product, elevating it from a simple craft project into a commercially viable brand. The signature became one of the defining features of the Cabbage Patch Kids, with every doll boasting Xavier Roberts' distinct mark. But Roberts didn't stop there. He knew that to turn this product into something that would sell on a massive scale, he needed a more marketable backstory. He didn't just want the dolls to be adopted. He wanted them to have a rich, whimsical history that would capture the imagination of children and parents alike. He created a new origin story for the dolls, turning them into babies that were found in cabbage patches, hence the name Cabbage Patch Kids. The backstory was key in making the dolls feel more like real adoptable beings rather than just playthings. Instead of Martha's simple adoption certificates, Roberts expanded the narrative, infusing it with a sense of magic and wonder. And of course, there was the physical makeover. While Martha's doll babies had a soft, human-like appearance, Roberts' version exaggerated certain features to make them even more unique and eye-catching. One of the most notable changes was the oversized round heads that became a signature look for Cabbage Patch Kids. This made the dolls instantly recognizable, and the larger-than-life heads gave them a certain charm that endeared them to kids everywhere. In 1982, Roberts finally began mass-producing the dolls under the name Cabbage Patch Kids. He quickly secured a partnership with Coleco, the toy manufacturer that was known for producing other popular toys at the time. Coleco, who had originally been a leather company before branching out into toys, and eventually video games, and yes, I've talked about them before on this channel in relation to the ColecoVision, was more than willing to throw their weight behind this new venture. The partnership allowed Roberts to take his small-scale operation and turn it into a full-blown phenomenon. It wasn't long before Cabbage Patch Kids were popping up in toy stores everywhere, and the dolls began to fly off the shelves faster than anyone had anticipated. Roberts' ability to take something simple and transform it into a billion-dollar industry is impressive, and, depending on how you look at it, a bit controversial. After all, he essentially took someone else's idea and, with a few tweaks, turned it into a massive franchise. But it's also a testament to his business savvy. He recognized the potential in Martha's original concept and figured out how to make it more appealing to the masses. By adding a unique name, a compelling backstory, and those instantly recognizable oversized heads, Roberts was able to create something entirely new, a toy that children around the world would clamor for. And the success wasn't just in the dolls themselves. The Cabbage Patch Kids brand quickly expanded into a full-blown pop culture phenomenon. It wasn't enough for kids to just adopt a doll. They wanted the experience. The adoption process, complete with official certificates and even Cabbage Patch adoption centers, added to the allure. Cabbage Patch Kids weren't just a toy. They were an experience, a rite of passage for many children in the 80s. It wasn't long before they became a cultural touchstone, with commercials, TV specials, and even a feature film further cementing their place in the hearts of millions. Now that we've gotten into the birth of Cabbage Patch Kids, we need to talk about the other side of the story, the lawsuit. Remember how I said that Xavier Roberts took Martha Nelson Thomas's concept and made it his own? Well, not everyone was thrilled about that, especially Martha. She wasn't too pleased to see her handmade dolls turned into a billion-dollar empire by Roberts, especially since she didn't have the legal protection she needed to retain control over her creation. Here's the thing. When Martha first made the doll babies, she never really thought about trademarking or copyrighting her work. Back in the late 70s, the doll industry was a far cry from the corporate behemoth it would become in the following decades. The idea of protecting such a personal, handcrafted item just didn't seem like a priority. But once Roberts came into the picture and began mass-producing the dolls under his own brand, it became clear that the lack of legal protection was a serious oversight. By the time Roberts began working with Coleco and taking the Cabbage Patch Kids to a larger audience, Martha realized the potential loss she was facing. It wasn't just about the loss of revenue. It was the loss of control over something she had worked so hard to create. So she decided to take legal action. Roberts admitted that his dolls were inspired by Martha's doll babies, but he claimed that he had created his own design. This, of course, didn't sit well with Martha, who argued that Roberts had essentially taken her idea and capitalized on it without giving her any credit or any share of the profits. The case went to trial, but it wasn't a clear-cut win for either side. The legal complexities surrounding intellectual property were still evolving at the time, and neither side had the sort of definitive evidence that would guarantee a clear-cut victory. Martha didn't have the legal infrastructure to back her claim, and Roberts had already made his mark with the Cabbage Patch Kids, which made it hard to prove exactly how much influence Martha's dolls had on the final project. After a lengthy and contentious legal battle, the case was eventually settled by the court. The specifics of the settlement remain shrouded in mystery to this day. There are rumors that the settlement was large enough to change Martha's life in a big way. Her husband even said that the settlement was enough to send the kids to college. While the legal victory may not have been the full vindication Martha had hoped for, it did provide some level of financial compensation for her, and she was able to walk away knowing that her contribution to the creation of the Cabbage Patch Kids had been recognized, at least to some extent. Even though the legal battle was over, the Cabbage Patch Kids were far from finished. In fact, the dolls only became more popular after the lawsuit was settled. By the mid-'80s, the Cabbage Patch Kids were an unstoppable force in pop culture. The frenzy surrounding the dolls reached new heights, and it wasn't just a fleeting fad. It was a full-blown cultural phenomenon. These weren't just toys anymore. They were collectibles, experiences, and symbols of childhood nostalgia. The sheer popularity of the Cabbage Patch Kids meant that they were featured in everything from merchandise to television specials. In 1985, the dolls even had their own animated special, Cabbage Patch Kids' First Christmas. The special aired on ABC and quickly became a holiday favorite, proving just how deeply the Cabbage Patch Kids had become ingrained in pop culture. Kids everywhere tuned in to watch their favorite dolls come to life on the screen. And the success of the special only reinforced the idea that the Cabbage Patch phenomenon was here to stay. But the craze wasn't just limited to the United States. By the mid-'80s, Cabbage Patch Kids had become an international sensation. These lovable dolls were flying off the shelves in countries all over the world, and parents and collectors were scrambling to get their hands on them. It was clear that this wasn't just an American craze, it was a global one. The Cabbage Patch Kids had transcended the realm of mere toys and had become part of a global pop culture moment. This international craze led to the creation of even more Cabbage Patch merchandise, including clothing, bedding, and accessories. Everywhere you looked, there was something related to the dolls. The dolls themselves were no longer the only product. They had spawned an entire line of related goods. Cabbage Patch Kids were everywhere, and there seemed to be no stopping the juggernaut. In fact, the Cabbage Patch Kids had grown into a brand that was synonymous with childhood in the 1980s. But with all this success came the inevitable backlash. By the end of the 80s, the Cabbage Patch fever had started to die down, and it was eventually replaced by new trends and toy crazes. However, the impact of the Cabbage Patch Kids was undeniable. The dolls had left a lasting imprint on pop culture, and they still hold a special place in the hearts of many who grew up during their heyday. The dolls didn't just dominate toy aisles, they became symbols of the consumer-driven culture of the 80s. The frenzy surrounding them reflected the growing power of mass marketing and brand culture, and they would go on to influence generation of toys and trends that followed. As with any fad, what goes up must come down. The meteoric rise of the Cabbage Patch Kids in the early 80s could only last so long. By the late 1980s, their once dominated presence in toy stores began to fade, signaling the start of the dolls' decline. The initial hysteria that surrounded the dolls had slowly started to wear off, and there were multiple factors at play. Part of the problem was simply the nature of trends. The intense craze of the 80s was inevitably replaced by newer, flashier toys that captured the attention of a new generation of kids. One of the first blows to the brand came in 1988 when Coleco Industries, the company that had been primarily responsible for manufacturing and distributing the Cabbage Patch Kids, went bankrupt. The company's financial troubles weren't solely tied to the dolls, but they were a key player in Coleco's downfall. Despite the dolls' massive popularity in their prime, the company's inability to sustain profitability in the face of competition and challenging tastes resulted in the assets, including the rights to the Cabbage Patch Kids, being sold off to Hasbro. When Hasbro took over the rights of the dolls, it signaled a shift in both production and marketing. The dolls, once a symbol of individuality and handcrafted charm, were now a mass-produced product under the hands of a corporate giant. While the dolls remained on store shelves, their appeal had started to dissipate. The original magic that had made the Cabbage Patch Kids so special, each one unique with its own name, personality, and adoption certificate, was replaced by a more standardized production process. The personal connection that children once felt with the dolls began to fade, and the Cabbage Patch brand, while still known, was no longer the runaway success it had been. In an attempt to revive interest in the Cabbage Patch Kids, newer versions of the dolls were introduced, such as the Cabbage Patch Snack Time Kids in the 90s. These dolls had a built-in mechanism that allowed them to eat plastic food when placed in their mouths. While the idea was innovative at the time, it didn't quite capture the hearts of fans the same way the originals had. Unfortunately, the Snack Time Kids were plagued with issues, notably safety concerns. The dolls' mechanical mouths were powerful enough to trap children's fingers or hair, leading to numerous reports of injuries. In response, Hasbro issued a recall, and the Snack Time Kids were pulled from the market altogether. This safety scandal only added to the dolls' waning popularity, as parents were understandably wary of letting their kids interact with toys that could potentially cause harm. The 1990s and 2000s saw Cabbage Patch Kids losing their foothold in the toy industry. Newer generations of children were more interested in electronic gadgets and interactive toys. While the brand still had a loyal following of collectors and fans of the original dolls, the younger demographic seemed less interested. The once dominated toy was now relegated to the fringes of the toy world, a relic of a bygone era. As more sophisticated toys with flashy features began to dominate the market, the Cabbage Patch Kids' charms started to seem outdated. The dolls that had once sparked chaos in stores were now struggling to maintain relevance. But as with many pop culture phenomena, the story doesn't end with decline. In recent years, the Cabbage Patch Kids have experienced a surprising resurgence. Just last year, they were inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame, cementing their place in history as one of the most iconic and influential toys ever created. This recognition helped breathe new life into the brand, and Cabbage Patch Kids found a new wave of fans, many of whom were introduced to the dolls through nostalgia. Today, Cabbage Patch Kids are still being produced, but they've evolved to keep up with the times. While the core elements of the doll remain the same, distinctive, oversized heads, soft bodies, and a name, the dolls now come in a variety of different styles and forms. From babies to animals and even adult-sized dolls, Cabbage Patch Kids have been reimagined to appeal to a new generation of collectors and fans. Modern-day versions of the dolls retain the charm and warmth that made them so beloved in the first place, but with updated designs that better reflect the tastes and trends of today's market. Some of the new versions are even customizable, allowing owners to create a more personal connection with the dolls once again. In addition to new designs, the brand has embraced the digital age. There are apps and online platforms where fans can connect with their dolls and even create digital versions of their Cabbage Patch Kids. The brand has also expanded its merchandise, offering everything from clothing to home decor, keeping the spirit of the Cabbage Patch Kids alive in modern times. This reinvention of the brand has helped ensure its continued relevance and popularity, proving that even toys that were once thought to be relics of the past can find a place in the modern world. The Cabbage Patch Kids story is one of immense creativity, exploitive success, and unforeseen challenges. From their humble beginnings as handmade dolls at craft fairs to the meteoric rise as a cultural phenomenon, the dolls captured the hearts of millions. But like any trend, their popularity fleeted. The bankruptcy of Coleco, the lawsuit between Martha Nelson Thomas and Xavier Roberts, and the eventual decline of the dolls in the 1990s are all part of the complex legacy of the Cabbage Patch Kids. Yet, the story didn't end with their decline. The Cabbage Patch Kids are a prime example of how nostalgia can be a powerful tool for revitalizing a brand. With careful reinvention and a return to their roots, these dolls have found a way to continue delighting new generations of fans. From the 2008 presidential election tie-in to their induction to the National Toy Hall of Fame and the modern-day customization and online presence, the Cabbage Patch Kids have proven that they still have a place in the hearts of many. So what's the takeaway from the Cabbage Patch saga? It's a story of a toy that became a cultural phenomenon, then faded, only to be reborn again. It reminds us that even the most fleeting trends can have lasting impacts, and how something as unique as a doll can leave an indelible mark on pop culture. If you grew up with a Cabbage Patch Kid, you're part of this extraordinary story. Whether you were caught in the frenzy or simply have fond memories of your childhood companion, there's no denying the impact these lovable little dolls had on the world. The Cabbage Patch Kids are more than just a toy. They're a piece of history. Before you go, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Were you one of these kids that had a Cabbage Patch Kid? Or maybe you just remember the crazy riots at the stores. Either way, I want to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to share this video with your friends if you think they'd enjoy the nostalgia. Bye for now, and Merry Christmas.